The article, The Problem of Evil, refers to the oft-repeated statement that all things are of God. But in the 5 verses cited, it will be found that the all things are always limited. And in the 1933 volume of Unsearchable Riches, it is maintained that the word all in such passages is never absolute. It will be observed that in the 1944 Concordant Version, the expression the universe appears to have dropped out. The reason for this we know not, but such an expression savors more of exegesis than translation. God can easily be operating the all things in accord with the plan of his will without actively directing every step of every being of every kind. When a king rules or controls a country, he does this in a general way only, leaving the administrative function to his servants and officials. A king or a president might step in on occasion when things are getting out of hand, but he never plans every step of every one of his subjects. It would be a distinct improvement could the Greek term boule, B-O-U-L-E, in its dozen occurrences be rendered by plan. This would suit every verse beautifully and would make sense where the counsel of his will is hardly intelligible. The verb is rendered plan at times. We were marked out before and according to a purpose of him, operating certain all things in accord with the plan of his will. God can operate his plan and control everything without actively directing the steps and moves of all people. He can operate these all things, whatever they are, and yet at the same time leave men a certain amount of liberty to choose their own ways. That the steps of all men are not directed by God is clearly shown by James 4:15. Hebrew believers were not to ignore the Lord's wishes, but were to be doing this or that should the Lord be willing. Suppose they proceeded to a certain town to trade or spend some time without seeking to know the Lord's will or asking his guidance. Would they not be acting contrary to God's will? To reason that God's intention or plan was that they should be disobedient and ignore his will would be to make revelation far too sophisticated for the ordinary, simple believer. God does not publish his own will with the intention that his own children disobey it. I shall now cite the very painful case of a Christian brother who was formerly a strong supporter of the teaching found in the article The Problem of Evil, and who wrote a number of brief articles for the magazine Unsearchable Riches a few years ago. I shall call him Mr. Captive, as he has become, unfortunately, Satan's bondman. This is what he wrote me some time ago. About 2 years ago, I discarded Unsearchable Riches, the Bible, and all other religions built exclusively upon mythology. Jehovah to me does not exist except as an old Jewish idol god, more cruel and forceful than the many other gods of that time. I once worshipped your God of love, but when my eyes were opened, my brains were tested. I saw one who was just a myth, one who drowned a world, burned a city, covered a poor man with boils, crucified his own and only son. I used my reason. I studied the origin of all these religions and saw exactly where I was off the rails. I would like to turn your mind toward reason, logic, and facts, 3 items seldom found in your so-called sacred scriptures. If we can aver that this poor man has been directed into such frightful steps simply because this is God's sovereign will, this man who was well taught in the scriptures and stout in defending them at one time, would it not be true that such a calamity might possibly fall upon any one of us at any time? James declares very clearly that God is not triable, aperastos, by evil things, yet himself is trying no one. But each one is being tried when by his own desire he is being drawn away and being lured. Thereafter the desire, conceiving, is bringing forth sin. Poor Mr. Captive has been lured by sins of some kind, not lured away by our God. It is not God that has started him off on the slippery path, but his own desires. If God's published word and will are not sufficient to convince him now, what else can God do but leave him to his own choice and ways? Some are seeking to maintain that God does not merely permit evils to overtake human beings, but that he actively and directly imposes evils upon men and leads them into exile, into evils. But we may not overlook words in the New Testament which have a meaning equivalent to permit. What about the verb eao? God, who makes the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, who in the bygone generation leaves, eason, aorist, all the nations to be going on in their ways, although he leaves another verb, aphikin, himself, not without testimony, doing good acts, giving showers from heaven and fruitful seasons. Acts 14, 16 through 17. This verb is defined as permit, as permit without interference. The Authorized Version generally renders by suffer. That God left or permitted the nations to go in their own ways is not to be disputed, and it is quite as clear that he is still permitting them to proceed along the same lines. The fact that he gives harvests shows the direction in which he does not neglect them. The times indeed then of that great ignorance condoning or overlooking God as to the present is charging men that all everywhere be changing their mind. Acts 17:30. Yet, in spite of this solemn charge, can we say that the great bulk of mankind does not continue to go on in its own ways? Paul hoped the Lord would permit certain things, 1 Corinthians 16:7, and the writer to the Hebrews hoped likewise, 6:3. Here the word is epitrepo. The Lord had to tolerate or bear with a faithless and perverted generation, according to Matthew 17:17 and Luke 9:41, where the verb is anichomai. God still suffers or tolerates a world that is strangely indifferent to his very existence. It is quite true that the scriptures never teach that God did permit evil to enter the universe, but it is just as true that never in the scriptures is there the slightest reference to any problem of evil. That there is a mystery regarding the origin of evil is beyond dispute. Never once, however, does any writer of the scriptures allude to any mystery or show any inclination to probe the matter. The Lord himself was silent on this weighty point. Paul reasoned out various other important matters, but is also silent regarding evil. But there are not lacking human beings who think themselves clever enough to spin from isolated verses some sort of a theory to account for the presence of evil. Have you ever observed that the passages or verses used are woven together and are forced to mean far more than they necessarily state? There are secrets that God has been pleased to reveal to men, and we can delight in these. But at the same time, there are things which God has not revealed, secret things which belong to Jehovah our God. Let us avoid all possibility of acting towards our God with any shadow of irreverence. Paul presents us with a clear and well-reasoned out treatise on sin and righteousness. Theories regarding evil, however, are one and all based upon scattered verbiage, which may or may not be germane to the subject. Upon Isaiah 45:7, an immense superstructure has been reared. I, one creating evil, has been made to mean I create all evil, and no one else does so. Human beings too can create. 1 Peter 2:13. Human beings undoubtedly are creators of many evil things and evil desires. The Septuagint at Isaiah 45:7 reads, creating evils. To pronounce Katizon Kaka, Ktizon Kaka. There is in this chapter no further allusion to the contents of verse 7. Isaiah had a splendid opportunity to clear up certain mysteries which bother modern man, but he avoids the matter completely. Another verse which may require a little elucidation is 1 John 3:8, literally, he who is doing the sin out of the slanderer or adversary is, seeing that from the beginning the slanderer is sinning. Now we are quite in order in inferring that the beginning referred to is that of Satan. What a pity John had not inspected the word his autou, A-U-T-O-U, after beginning. And precisely what is the connection between the two clauses joined by seeing that? Why should the sin doer be out of the devil? Because of the fact that it was from his beginning that the devil sinned? Is there any logical connection? Some commentators have stated it this way, that sin doers are of the devil for the reason that from their own beginning as human beings, the devil is sinning. There are many points upon which our curiosity is not satisfied. Some things are simply not our business. The present age is notably one in which people will not brook ignorance. Experts we must have upon every matter. The current theory regarding the eons is largely based upon sheer guesswork. No one yet can present a logical explanation of Hebrew 9:26 or Hebrew 1:8 for the eon of the eon. The same serious flaw which we found and condemned in other sects we encounter here. The guess becomes the truth.